Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Michael Minosora, who's the chairman of Siguiri Gold, who are focused on the exploration of the Siguiri Gold Project in Guinea, West Africa, where they are targeting low-cost production of bulk tonnage at surface open-pit mining operation. Michael has extensive experience in both professional services sector and the resources sector, including previously the CFO of Woodside Limited and also Fortescue Metals Group. He's also been chairman of an ASX-listed company, Artisanal Limited, and also the founder of Bauxite De Kimbo Limited, who developed a bauxite project in Guinea. Michael's on the show today to tell us a little bit more about the company, the project, and discuss their upcoming IPO to raise $10 million, and also highlight their exploration activities. Michael, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Really well, thanks, Rob, and thanks for that introduction. I didn't realise I'd done so much. But relevant to this audience is my experience in Guinea. I've been in Guinea since about 2015, primarily and initially as a result of that bauxite project that you referred to. So that's a project which we took from virtually greenfields through to production, and it now continues quite successfully to operate. I must say I'm a big fan of Guinea. It's a country that's been overlooked, and I often muse to myself that people look at Africa and think of it as one country. In fact, Africa has 54 separate countries, and it's not really sensible to think of it as one country. My attraction to Guinea in particular has come about because it is stable, the people are very peaceful, and it's actually a good place to operate, acknowledging, however, it's still got a long way to go. It's quite a poor country, but in the short 9 years since I've been in country, I've seen it develop, and that development is now growing momentum. And what's bringing in companies into Guinea is about its geological bequest. We're now seeing the bauxite industry having developed to become one of the top 2 bauxite producers in the world. Recently, most of your audience would have heard or read about the Simandou iron ore project, which is a joint venture with a price tag of about $24 billion between Winning Group and Rio Tinto. And we're seeing the emerging gold industry. Groups like Robex have just recently raised $126 million for their Guinea project. Predictive Discovery have in their hands what will be, if not already, a world-class gold project, and they've raised about $90 million over the last 9 months. And there's a number of other companies similar to ours that are looking to enter or have entered Guinea, particularly in the gold sector. That said, the Siguiri Gold Project came about because of its location near to the Anglo Gold Ashanti sag mine, which is only 10 kilometres away. The Anglo Gold Ashanti gold mine has been operating since 1998, uninterrupted. So that's about 26 years of operation at around 240,000 ounces a year, and I understand it's now moving to about 270,000 ounces a year. So it has a great track record. A little further away from us is the Nord Gold Leafer Gold Project, which has been operating for about 10 years, and it's producing around 200,000 ounces. So Siguiri Gold is not a new concept. It's not a new innovation in terms of opportunity in Guinea. It's actually following the well-trodden path of groups like Anglo Gold and like Nord Gold.
Yeah, appreciate that. Obviously, introduction on Guinea. I wonder if you just tell us a little bit about yourself. We normally start the podcast off by audience understanding the guest. Obviously, I've done a brief introduction, so I just wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about your career, how you got obviously into oil and gas, and obviously the mining industry, obviously back in the day, and tell us something that our audience may not know about yourself.
Yeah, so my career actually was largely with Ernst & Young, which is now EY. So I was a long-term partner there and moved from being a partner in the West Australian office where I live through to becoming global head of management consulting. I then took a career change move that led me into Woodside and then a few other moves eventually found me at Fortescue Metals Group working with Andrew Forrest, which was a great experience. That inspired me to go and do my own thing, and that's essentially what I've done since.
I wonder if you just obviously tell us about Siguiri Gold as a company. How obviously the company was formed and originated, and how's it grown? So a little bit about the story behind the company.
Yeah, the story is actually a really interesting story. The founders, two guys called Michael Minosora and Daniel James, who are long-term people who have been involved in Africa, and particularly West Africa, and have had gold experience in other ventures. They identified the opportunity in the Siguiri Basin, and particularly with the presence of Nord Gold and Anglo Gold, which I've mentioned previously. So they ventured out to the Siguiri area, and first thing they noticed was that there was artisanal workings in the area, which eventually became the foundation for Siguiri Gold. So their marker or their signpost were these artisanal workings. And that overlaid with the knowledge that they had on the Siguiri Basin, and particularly the geological formations that run through that basin, zeroed them in on where the company's projects are today. So that they first established or were granted permits back in 2018. In about 2020, they were introduced to two of the current directors of the company, investors out of New York, two folks called Henry Heaney and Sean Pye. Both of them had a very good track record in developing companies like Siguiri Gold. They were involved. I was approached about 2 years later in 2022, came in initially as chairman, and through a number of changes and falling in love with the project, because it is actually a really good project, have taken on a more hands-on role in recent years, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. So what the team has done since securing the properties, they've actually done a lot of work, and this is not an exploration company that you'd normally see becoming listed. It is what I call an advanced exploration company. It's had 33,000, almost 34,000 metres of drilling. Over 20,000 metres of soil sampling has taken place. So we have a very, very good idea and knowledge of the geology of our area, what we're sitting on, and importantly, confirmation that we sit on the same geological structures as the SAG mine, which is only 10 kilometres to the north of us. What that does gives me a lot of confidence, a huge amount of confidence that we will be able to replicate in time SAG. There's no reason that we won't. Now, the drilling confirms that we sit on the same structures. The information we're getting from different sources confirms that. So to me, it's not a question of if we'll develop a project, it's simply a question of when.
Before we get to speak about the project and all the exploration that you've been doing, I understand there's a lot of artisanal mining in and around the project area.
Yeah.
How has the historical artisanal mining guided the work today, and obviously completed by yourself and the exploration team?
Yeah, they are really the guideposts. Many companies, particularly in greenfield situations, need to do sampling work, and they might fly aeromag and radiometrics across the area. But what we have, and it is reasonably common in countries like Guinea, the artisanals are the first indications of gold being present. So whilst we do have artisanal miners in and about our properties, they're very well managed, and we certainly don't have issues in working with them. They're a valued part of what we do. They are people from the local communities, which there are 5 of, which come within our area. We have excellent relations with them. So we work together with them and have very limited issues in managing and working with them.
I wonder if you can just tell us about some of the exploration activities that you completed so far, and I suppose what are the next stage
Sure.
in regards to obviously post-listing once you've raised the funds.
So the company holds 3 permits. They're called the North, South and West permits. The West permit is our most recent permit. On the first permits I mentioned, on the North, South, essentially what we've done is, again, we've followed the artisanal workers and we've drilled along those artisanal workers' sites. So to give you some concept, the artisanal workers here are generally limited to using hand tools. So we're not seeing too much in the way of excavation. But again, as I've said a few times, they're great pathfinders for us to where the gold is. And what we're finding is, as you would expect, a very strong correlation between where the artisanals are working and our drill results. So what we've been able to identify, not only from the relationship we have with, or the relationship in terms of correlation we have with the artisanal workers, we can, and when we then overlay that with radiometrics and other information, we've identified 30 kilometres of strike. And of that 30 kilometres of strike, we literally only touched a few kilometres. So what we've been doing is, as we've been drilling under the various campaigns, is continuing to step out our knowledge, in particular of the North and South claims. On the West claim, which I mentioned is a more recent claim, we just completed a 10,000 or almost 10,000 metre drill program to assess what's there, because it's largely untouched. What we have on that program, which was fairly modest in terms of depth, we were literally only drilling down 50 metres, putting fences across that west claim area. We've identified that we've got the continuation of what's called the Fatoya Geological formation that runs through SAG and into the west claim. So we're very encouraged by that. Importantly, the assay results of that are largely still awaiting to have happened. Those results will be releasing post-IPO completion. And the simple reason for doing that is that at least here in Australia, when you're preparing a prospectus, if you continue to do work, you have to update your prospectus. That becomes very time-consuming and costly. So we put a hold on that. So that's pretty exciting. In terms of next steps for us, very much focused on, and particularly on the north and south permits, and especially on the areas which we call Tamba, Cocoon and Mog, is to effectively infill drill where we have drilled, do a little bit of extension drilling to enable us to deliver a maiden resource in the first quarter or first half of next year, which we're very confident in being able to do. Now, the interesting thing with the Siguiri project is it's characterised by the fact that it's largely an oxide geological formation. So the oxide materials are very friable, which means they're very easily mined, no drill and blast, very easily processed, and have excellent metallurgical characteristics, which translates to mean that we can recover very high, we can achieve very high recoveries of gold, which when you put that all together, it actually brings forward the opportunity to plan and construct a very cost-efficient, very low-cost project. So our goal, and this is very much what we're all about, our goal is to go into production initially with at least a minimum 5-year mine life, and more likely longer than that, at a low capex solution and a low OPEX cost of operation. And that's where we will differentiate ourselves from other people. And the reason we're able to do that is because we're focused on the oxide material. What is exciting and what is unknown, and it's largely been overlooked in Guinea and in some neighbouring countries, is what sits below the oxide material. Traditionally, companies like SAG, Anglo Gold, who are nearby us, the focus has been on the oxide material. What we do know now, and this was one of the great findings of Predict, is if you go deeper and you get into fresh material, you actually often see a positive grade improvement and a significant improvement. So what we will be doing as part of our drilling program, and whilst it's focused is absolutely on delivering a maiden resource Q1, H1 next year, we will be putting a few deeper holes in to see what's actually down there. Where we have gone deeper into the transition, the fresh rock previously, we've seen a great improvement of 3 to 5 grams a tonne per metre. Well, that's very good.
It seems obviously you've got a good relationship with the artisanal miners. Yep. How have you developed that relationship with them? And obviously I've taken a bit of time to work with them. I just wonder if you'd be able to give us any tips, because I take it if some people that may be listening that are junior miners and have interaction with artisanal miners may see sometimes them being not part of their activities. I just wonder if there was any tips that you could give to strengthen and build relationships with those artisanal miners.
Rob, the reason that we've got such a good relationship with the 5 communities around us really goes to the credit of the founders, Michael, Mulvey and Dan James, along with Max and Anthony. They're the people that are really our core. They're the people that are at site, and what they did from day one was to respect the locals, the communities, work with the communities. So we don't necessarily have the world's biggest social impact program, but what we do have is a very effective social impact program where we do employ them as we need to, particularly around drilling campaigns. We do provide services to them, simple things like preparing their agricultural areas or plots for cultivation each year, putting in, or more likely repairing roads. It's the small regular things that matter, and it's the respect that the guys at site show to the locals, and we get that back. It's fantastic, actually.
Obviously, the Siguiri Gold Project is only about 10 k's from Anglo Gold Ashanti's long-standing SAG gold mine. Obviously, you mentioned the geological similarities that have obviously been identified. I just wonder if you can explain a little bit more about that, and obviously the similarities between their project and yours.
Yeah, so we sit on the same Siguiri Basin. As it turns out, the fellow that did our independent geological report, Mark Watts, he was actually a long-term exploration manager with Siguiri at the SAG mine. So Mark not only has had a lot of experience in the basin, he's written many papers on that. And if you go into if any of the listeners go into the independent geologist report that's in the prospectus or part of the prospectus, you'll see Mark refers to his own papers. So we were very fortunate in coming across Mark, and it was luck. Can't claim that it was designed to be like that. And so he's been able to inform us of things that we weren't aware of, but what it all points to and what comes through in Mark's independent geologist report is just confirmation we sit on the same geological structure. Again, often theories can mean a lot, but in our case, the drilling that we've done has confirmed that we sit on those structures. The core samples make clear that we're pulling the same style of core out that SAG would pull out of its working areas. So we're very comfortable and confident that we're sitting where we need to be. It's a great address.
Obviously, the project is an advanced exploration stage by most IPO company standards, obviously, which because of the significant drilling that you've already completed. With the funding you're obviously set to receive, can the project now progressively, rapidly, I suppose, move towards development and then production?
Sure, yeah. So really, really good question, Rob. If the funding that we're raising at the moment is designed to take us very close to a PFS, if not higher level of confidence in terms of the project. So what we're doing is we're working in two streams as we go forward. One is the drilling. Because of the confidence we have in delivering the ounces, we've already started getting information in terms of the project, what it's going to look like, what its capital cost might be, what the operating costs might look like. And the reason that we can do that is that we've got a comparable right next door to us in the SAG mine. The SAG mine's been operating since 1998, as I mentioned before, and it's done that very successfully. They're processing approximately 25 million tonnes of ore a year. They're producing 270,000 ounces or thereabouts a year. It's just a great proxy for us. The difference between us and SAG will be, we'll be using newer technologies, but essentially the same process flow. So not a lot of invention, very straightforward, very simple. And again, just to emphasise, having oxide material simplifies our life. Having oxide material from surface, and it's literally from surface. There's very little overburden in most cases, reduces our upfront costs. So it is a project that will be a fast start. It is a project that doesn't have technological risk. It's simple. And that was one of the big attractions to me in the project. We're not going to have a massive overburden removal campaign. We're not going to be dealing with fresh rock. It is as simple as I've mentioned it.
If you're looking at Africa as a continent, and I suppose more so West African countries, they're sometimes viewed as, I suppose, risky jurisdictions, obviously to operate in for mining companies. Obviously, looking at the media, there's a lot of stories around West Africa, and obviously it being a risky jurisdiction. Have your experiences, obviously working in Guinea, what have your experiences been like working in the country? And do you find it to be pro-mining jurisdiction, maybe more so compared to some of the other West African jurisdictions?
Rob, I'm glad you raised that question, because there's a couple of ways I look at Guinea and then more broadly the world. And risk has many different aspects to it. So maybe if I just unpack that a bit. To get a project up and running in Guinea, providing you've done all your groundwork, probably take on average maybe a year. Now, if I then compare that to where I'm doing this podcast from in Western Australia, you'd be lucky to get a project up in 5, 6, 7 years of the same scale. So the risk, there's a different type of risk. There's risks in terms of government approvals, both in every country, and there's different pressures. Specifically in Guinea, if I go back to that, as I mentioned, I've been there since 2015. There's been 2 change of governments or coups since then. They were largely very peaceful, and I'd have to say that the current government is doing an exceptionally good job in terms of moving the country forward. I've seen in the last 3 to 4 years some very significant changes in infrastructure. Sure, and sort of support services. Sure, it's got a long way to go, but it's come a long way already. To my knowledge, no company has been in any way had their permits or entitlements taken off them, providing that they've followed the legislation. You've got CBG that's been operating successfully since I think it's 1964, and that's a joint venture with a number of foreign investors and the Guinea government. I've mentioned the SAG mine that's been operating successfully for 26 years. And I think the big vote of confidence that I'm seeing now in the country comes from folks like Rio Tinto and others. They're investing large dollars in the country, and very, very large dollars. And I would assume that they're doing that because they feel like it's a good jurisdiction. So in summary, Guinea is a good place. It is looking to encourage development. It is seen what other nearby countries that sit in the same geological zones as Guinea does, such as Mali and Burkina Faso, having experienced a lot of gold and successful gold operations. And I think the government just feels like it needs to catch up. So what that means from my perspective is it is pro-mining and in a sensible and measured way, which is really good from my point of view.
Yeah. And I suppose carrying on speaking about jurisdictions, obviously Australia is probably the number one mining jurisdiction in the world. Is there anything you feel that Australia, the Australian mining industry, can learn from what Guinea is doing? Obviously, you speak highly about Guinea. Is there anything that the Australian mining industry can learn from what you're doing and the activities that you're doing in Guinea?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of our activities, we'll be doing something that's pretty straightforward. In terms of government, this probably sound odd to some of your listeners, but Guinea actually has a very straightforward approvals process in terms of taking a exploration opportunity through to a operating mine perspective happening. Like it's there's not much in the way of unknowns, and certainly no serious unknowns. And that formula seems to be appealing to lots of different companies that are now entering Guinea.
If we took a look at gold prices, obviously you're in gold. Obviously they're reaching record highs at the moment. Do you expect there will be obviously a surge of interest in West African countries, and obviously particularly in Guinea, as more companies see obviously the potential rewards for operating there, and hopefully with the gold price sort of building momentum and increasing in price as we go on?
Yeah, another good question, Rob. What we do know is a lot of the traditional areas where gold has been mined, whether that's in Australia or North America, and to some extent, but probably less in South America. A lot of those projects are starting to get towards the end of their life. They've been going for, in many cases, decades. So it's getting more expensive to operate. The cost of operating those countries is becoming higher. Labour costs are continually going up. So there's a natural move by gold producers to look to new countries, new areas for opportunity, because typically the return reward sort of outcomes are starting to favour going to countries like Guinea, where because the mineralisation is typically much easier to access, labour is cheaper, other costs are actually not that much out of kilter, funnily enough, to say more established countries. So if we just look at sheer economics of supply and demand, as the traditional areas start moving towards the end of their lives, companies will and are actually looking at places like Guinea as the new frontier for gold and other metals and minerals.
Looking at your upcoming IPO, what would you say to investors to look at your company and why they should potentially consider you to invest in?
Yeah, so we actually launched our IPO today. So we're off and running. So we've been through all the regulatory compliance work, which is a really good process, very, very robust. So in looking at Siguiri Gold as an investment opportunity, what I'd encourage investors to do is look at what is the value per resource ounce that companies are valued at going forward. And so it's part of it's trying to make a comparison or a comparable value companies, but also importantly, what is the potential to report a JORC or NI 4101 resource. And for us, what I say to investors, we've had some very, very good drill results to date. We will be releasing a maiden resource in the first quarter or first half of next year, and we've got 30 kilometres of strike still in front of us. So it's inevitable that as we go forward, we'll build on our maiden resource, and that's what's going to drive value in the first instance, and very closely behind that what will drive value is as we move towards a PFS, a BFS, and then eventually a project, and people will see where the value is going to be delivered. Now, that value horizon is actually pretty short when you think about it. And by that I mean we will be reporting the drill results on the West Claim, which I mentioned earlier, that are outstanding. That information is going to come out probably at the end of the third quarter. That'll be an indication of what we have in the West Claim. We'll be reporting drilling from the funding that we're raising, and that reporting will again start probably in the beginning of the last quarter of this year. That'll then lead into the maiden resource in the first quarter or first half of next year, and we'll keep drilling. So there's a really good news flow, and I just encourage investors to look at, what does that potential look like and what could it look like in a valuation basis.
And lastly, in concluding, what's the outlook for the next 6 to 12 months? And is there anything in particular that you're going to focus on during that time?
I think the outlook, Rob, is what I've just described. It's just drilling, reporting, and moving the project forward into a construction mode and then into production mode. Very exciting time, and it is a privilege. I know the team feel same as I do about being involved in what could be the next, or what should be the next gold producer in Guinea.
Great. Michael, right. Thank you for your time. Appreciate you sharing your story about Siguiri Gold and what the future holds for the company. And it seems a very exciting prospect, and wish you well for the next sort of 6 to 12 months, and obviously post IPO, and obviously further drilling. If our audience wants to follow the story, if they want to reach out to you, if they've got any questions, how can they go about doing that? What social media platform channels are you on?
Yeah, so we've obviously got our website. We're on all the major platforms. My contact details are on the website. Really, really happy and enjoy listening to investors. There's always lots of advice from a lot of people, which I'm very happy to listen to, because I do know that some people got some really good concepts, and that's something that we're always interested in hearing about.
Great. Thank you again, Michael. Hopefully you can come on the podcast next year and give us an update on how things have progressed.
We'll definitely do that. Thank you very much for your time, Rob.
Yeah. Hope you enjoyed that episode. As always, appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes far and wide. And until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.